May I please request Mr. Matthew Cherian to please come on the dais if he's somewhere inside. Okay, so we now begin with our fourth session, which is also one of the priority areas of the next month's G20 in Osaka, which is on aging population and global macroeconomic stability. To chair the session, we have with us Mr. Chulju Kim, who is the Deputy Dean, CBT and Special Activities at the Asian Development Bank Institute, and who is also the lead co-chair of the Task Force on Aging at the T20 Japan Summit. Among the panelists, we have Professor S. Irudaya Rajan, who is a professor at the Center for Development Studies, Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. Professor K.S. James, who is the director of IIPS Mumbai. And Mr. Matthew Cherian, who is the CEO, HelpAge India. Now, may I invite Mr. Chulju Kim to please present some of the findings at the recently conducted T20 Summit. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. As introduced, my name is Chulju Kim. I am Deputy Dean of Asian Development Bank Institute and the lead co-chair of Task Force on Aging under Japanese T20 process. First of all, I would like to say that ADB is very pleased to be partnering with the ICRIER on supporting this important G20 conference. I think it is more meaningful because this year Japan is hosting G20. Also, ADBI also is secretariating the T20 process. T20 is one of the engagement group of the G20. It's meant to provide policy recommendations to G20 policy makers. Actually, on Monday, last Monday, we had a T20 summit where we published a communique which was delivered to Japanese government for the incorporating the inputs into G20 communique, where G20 summit is held in Osaka in June. So, taking this opportunity, I would like to introduce you some key findings of our task force on aging as a background for the panelist discussion. First, very briefly, demographic transition. So, starting from the young society, every country is moving toward aging society and older society. Basically because of the declining fertility rate and the longer the longevity. So then from young society, aging society, the countries are enjoying the first demographic dividend. And aging society to older society, countries, depending on the situation, countries might enjoy the second demographic dividend. So as you can see, G20's population is rapidly aging. The population of aged 65 and above is fastly increasing in every G20 countries, including India. As a result, the population pyramid is changing and continuously changing, starting from the kind of the pyramid shape, and you moving to the bell shape and the thinner bell shape and so on. But having said that, there is a great deal of diversity in timing and degree, even among G20 countries. As you can see, high-income countries and middle-income countries are experiencing rapid population aging compared to low-income countries. Accordingly, demographic dividends, first demographic dividends in 2015 and 2035 also significantly differs among G20 countries. As you can see, Japan, Germany will deepen negative demographic dividends, whereas China and Korea will turn to negative demographic dividends. And the other countries, including India, will lower first demographic dividends significantly. So what would be the impacts from population aging? All other things being equal, population aging, the meaning, each worker will have to support more retirees, will lead to lower economic growth, and heavy strain on the public finance and the sustainability of the social security system. For example, this is kind of a projection of the growth in G20 countries. As you can see, almost all countries will experience lowering economic growth. As a G20 together, there will be, from 1990 to 2015, the average, unweighted average growth amounted to 3.2%. But until 2050, the growth rate will be around 1.8%. Then huge discrepancy. Especially China and Korea will experience a sharp decline in growth rate. However, aging is a very fluid concept. So there could be different result from population aging. So labor force that works longer and live healthier and saves more and invest in human capital can lead to economic growth and adequate social security system. Much depends on the policies we are taking today. So population aging poses huge challenges. In the fast aging economies, aging threatens the sustainability of financial institutions, fiscal institutions, and the efficacy of conventional macroeconomic policies, thus require timely structural reforms. In the still younger economies, aging in conjunction with the disruptions linked to technological advancement, rising inequality, and high informality, and the regional migration renders forward-looking policy development very, very difficult. I will elaborate on the developing country issues. So countries should actively pursue policies that sustain economic growth and the macroeconomic integrity and that deliver social protection to those in need. So against this background, Task Force on Aging has worked to provide evidence-based policy recommendations along these 5 policy themes: macroeconomic impact policies and the labor market reforms and fiscal sustainability and immigration policies and financial innovation and international cooperation. Let me briefly provide some key recommendations. First recommendation is improve data and analysis. Actually, the channels of population aging are numerous and subject to considerable uncertainty. The national difference in the savings and investment behavior, a type of social security system, and the health of the fiscal policy, and the health of the elderly, all combined to shape impacts of population aging. So we need better data, better analysis. So in order to do that, the countries should extend the national statistical system and enhance national capacity to access, utilize, analyze data by age, gender, income group, and on the linkage of demographic growth, and public finance, and generational economy. Also, countries should promote international data collection and research on healthcare, elaborated previous session. Second recommendation is the G20 countries should embrace holistic structural reforms because the impact of population aging are intertwined in every corner of a society, an economy, and the people's life. So countries should first, for the younger countries, the countries should extend and enhance the first demographic dividend phase through policies that increase savings, labor market participation, and productivity. I will elaborate on this. And then also for aged countries, like Japan, the countries should implement holistic structural reforms in labor market, social security, public finance, and promote investment in human and physical infrastructure. So with aging, effectiveness of traditional, conventional macroeconomic policies are diminished. So that means that countries should reform fiscal policies by extending tax bases and reforming age-related expenditures. Also, countries need to revisit monetary policies. I will skip this part. And then also labor market reform is very important. So to compensate the lack of the labor supply, countries need to expand the labor supply by facilitating longer works, say removing mandatory retirement rules, prohibiting discriminations. And also, countries need to bring in more female workers into labor markets through better child care services and abolishment of discriminatory practice and so on. Here, productivity is key. So that means that countries need to improve education system, school, vocational, and the lifelong system to enhance the skill set to over the life cycle. And also, countries need to invest in higher levels of the capital accumulation, technological investment, AI, automation, infrastructure in digital transport and housing. Also, labor market institution is very important. So one important aspect is to redesign the wage system from seniority to performance-based system so that to facilitate labor movement toward high productivity segments. Also, it is important to strengthen safety regulation and provide incentives to make work environment safer so that countries increasing worker capacity and a healthier life. Then another area is to facilitate the migration. Countries should promote inclusive and flexible international migration to meet aging, reduce the labor shortage. And also, countries need to systemize skill development for migrants by comprehensive international framework. Another important area is to reorient social security system. I just touched upon some basic recommendations. The countries should have this kind of 3 layers of the social security system: a strong first pillar pension, and the universal health care we discussed in the last session, and the long-term care policies. For the details thing, I'll skip this one. And then also we need to develop the financial products and innovation and international cooperation. Countries need to enhance financial literacy and improve savings and facilitate the wealth accumulation of the elderly. In addition to those measures, also countries need to facilitate the regional economic integration toward the more cross-border movement of capital and services. That's because the difference national difference in the aging creates a window of opportunity to increase international cooperation in terms of the flow of funds from the developing countries, advanced countries to developing countries. For the younger developing countries, so anyway, even though some countries are young still, but eventually the countries are moving toward a population aging. Also, for some countries like China and Korea, the speed is very, very fast compared to other countries. So the countries are facing the problems of so-called getting old before the getting rich. So they are risk prepared in terms of the fiscal space, social security, and so on. So they need to establish some systems to deal with the situation. But at the same time, they are in good position in terms of the learning from the other countries, other Asian countries, not repeating the mistake by the countries. And then, to institute their systems depending on their country context. So this is India's demographic transition. Still, India is still currently very young, but still going on anyway, the population aging. So India also need to prepare. So the policies for younger developing countries, first, most important is to maximize first demographic dividends, investment in education, infrastructure, to improve productivity, and develop the tax coverage and enhance efficiency, increasing domestic resource mobilization, and design and implement proper social security system, and strengthen governance and enhance productivity to attract foreign direct investment from the developed countries. So also the countries need to implement labor market reforms, savings, and financial literacy. Also, for the G20 countries, should support the developing countries by establishing a comprehensive framework to evaluating a social security system, and then to support the countries to enjoy more flow of funds from the developed countries. So I think in the opening session, we heard that we need some developed countries' anger. I think we need to further develop these elements for supporting younger countries. So these are some policy brief. Contain detailed data and analysis. If you are interested, you can check our website and then can download and learn from the policy briefs. Thank you very much. With that, I'll invite our distinguished panelists for their, sharing their inputs. First, let me invite Dr. Irudaya Rajan, who is an expert in the population aging in India. Please share your ideas. You can around 20 minutes.
Thank you, Rajat, for inviting us for this session. In fact, we are all, I think, sitting here, all of us are pleased to have a session on aging here because it's not being talked about. What I am going to do, I am going to speak what I call them the second demographic dividend. India is still talking about the first demographic dividend. We are talking about the second demographic dividend. How we can use it for the economy and society. That's what I am going to focus on my presentation. And this is what I'm going to do in the next 15 minutes probably. I'll give you one slide on the G20 to talk to you about are we defining elderly correctly or not, because I think we are defining elderly wrongly. That's why we are all talking about elderly wrong way sometimes. And then I will also talk about a little bit on India. When we talk about India today, we have 140 million people above 60. And then give you idea on the trends in TFR and the life expectancy. Then I will talk about productive aging. This is very important for us. They are not just aging, they are productive aging, they are healthy aging. We should talk about a little bit detail on elderly. Then the second innings. I think I can see some of the people sitting here, they all have second innings. We should talk about second innings. Many people do second innings, then why do you talk about them as a burden? I think we should relook at our idea on them. Basically, put elderly as not as liabilities. Because when all the banks will prepare a balance sheet, they'll put liabilities one side and assets other side. If I look at an old man as a liability, my policy will be different. If I look at him as an asset, then I will think in a different way. So we have to change our mindset on elderly. That's what I'm going to do. Then the political participation of seniors, which is very important. We had such election is concluded. We had 542 MLAs. I'm going to give you the age profile of all the MLAs right now for you to know how elderly are participating in the elections. And they win the election also. So if they can do, why can't we should worry about them? Then lastly, integrating elderly with policy thing and also contribution. We have to integrate elderly into development. Many of the planning document, they don't talk about elderly. Even the recently concluded election manifesto, nothing about elderly, except they will give you pension. They can do many things. Yeah, so we should talk about how elderly can be part of your whole activity. Now, this is the first point I want to raise for all of you. One is that this is the proportion of old person for the last 50 years, 1950 to 2030, for all the 60-20 countries. Look at Japan and look at India. India, we are talking about out of 100 people, 8 people are above 60. Whereas we are talking about Japan, out of 100 people, 35 people are above 60. That means 1/3 of the Japanese population is elderly according to 60 plus. Whereas India, out of 10, even not 10, even out of 12, you have only 1%. But please remember, we are defining both countries 60 plus. Whereas in Japanese, an average Japanese lives 80 years. Here, an average Indian lives only 63 years. You are comparing both of them, putting as 60. How can you compare? This is like comparing orange and apples. A man 60 in India is different than man 60 in Japan. So we have to look at the real definition. Are we defining elderly properly? We are defining them for last 100 years, 60 plus elderly. But my father is not like my grandfather. We have to look at the elderly is changing. Their character is changing. And I will be different than my father. And my son will be different when he gets old. So we have to think about when they are changing, you are putting them in same bracket, 60 plus, you are old man. No, we have to think about that. I think this is something all the policymakers think. Are we defining elderly properly as 60 plus? Is 60 plus all are elderly? I will come back to that. Again, I want to discuss deeply on that. Second point, when you talk about 140 million elderly today in this country, we are talking about something like out of 109%. But I want to give you, look at here, I want to pick up only some numbers here. Out of elderly here, 140 million, we always, in demography, we always call young old and old old. Who are the young old? I think I don't see anybody old here in this room, but I see a lot of young old. Young olds are 60 to 74. Now, young old is almost 61% of them are less than 75-year-old, between 60 to 74. And an average Indian live after reaching 60 only 15 years. That is all. After that, only bonus. Only bonus. You can live 2 more years, 3 more years. But the average Indian lives after 60 only 15 years. That means young old is the maximum people can think of. And you look at the young old are not old. They are young. They are not old. They are old for you, but they are young old. In their mindset, in their health, in their lifestyle, in their activity, they are young. I think that is something we have to carry home. And the second thing, if you look at the elderly education and occupation, today elderly are different from the elderly which is going to come back after 20 years. For example, you take my grandmother, she got 9 children. What she left when she died? Nothing. Just 9 children. But today, we elderly have only 1 child. When you are dying, you are leaving lot of asset to your children. That means the future elderly are entirely different. So you cannot put them like, my grandfather was like that, my father. No, you are different. So the difference we have to identify in policy making. That is very, very important point I would like to carry forward for you. You can see that again here, TFR. Somebody was talking in the earlier session about TFR. Look at that. The TFR in India was 6 children per woman. Today we have only 1.1. Even people are, in fact, in some of the states like Kerala, when I come from, out of 10 couples, 1 couple have no children at all. Forget about 1 child. Now, these people will grow old. So, you have 1 child growing old in your household different than when you are grown with your 5 brothers and 1 sister. So, you are imagining. So, you have to imagine the elderly future. You are not imagining. You are still thinking depressed elderly, old man walking like this. You should think of a man, imagined elderly, which the future will be looks like. And look at that. When India was gained independence, and an average Indian was living only 40 years. Many of them even not lived even up to 60 years. But today, we are talking about a Indian born today will live 63 years. Now, please remember, currently anybody above 60 in this country will live only 15.6 years or 16 years. We are worried about those people. They are going to live 16 years. You are worried about them. They will reduce economic growth. They will eat our saving. What are we talking about? They are living only 15 years. But please remember, they have contributed the society for 60 years. They are not just dumb and deep for 60 years. They contributed to the society for 60 years. And they are living additional 15 years, which their parent did not get. But you are looking at them. Oh, you are living now. You are burdened. You are reducing economic growth. You are looking at them like this man is not dying, which is very sad. At the same time, you are celebrating the UNDP human development. People live longer. We are great state. Kerala always claim great state because you are living longer. But when they live longer, you say you are a burden for us. What is this? We are a double standard we are talking about. I think this is very sad for us to relook our understanding on elderly. They are living only 15 more years. Let them live peacefully. Let them live happily. Give them pension. Give them health care. Please remember, they have contributed 60 years. They are not just sitting and eating for 75. So you have to recognize their contribution. We are not recognizing their contribution. I think that is where we are failed in our policy. I have to recognize I am standing here because of our parents. Like that we should recognizing them. Elderly is not came from heaven. He was born, grown up, worked, whatever work, he is now reached 60 years. So you are worrying about that 50 years and talking policies, program, do this, do this. Let the man live, enjoy his 15 years. Very important, let them live. Because let them live in peace, not rest in peace. Rest in peace will come later. Let them live in peace. Allow them to live peacefully when they are here. Don't talk too much about them. They are eating my money. Country will go. No, the country will not go. They contributed their right at 60 years. They have worked hard. Some of them look very old. They worked hard for their children, for the society. So don't put them like that. Now, again, I want to tell you, these people who are 15 years, I'll give you the slide for you. This is very, very important for us. Look here. They live 15 years. Out of that, only 3 years they are living in a very bad health condition. That means 12 years they can contribute to the household. A grandmother, unpaid worker in the house. Can you put in your economic statistics? Grandmother. If you have a grandmother in your house, it's like a blessing for you. It's a blessing. Unpaid family caregiver. Unpaid, you have to pay through your nose. But they are living, out of 15 years, they are living only 3 years in some sickness, bedridden, broken their legs, hip pain, this pain, that pain. 12 years, still they can contribute at least their families. And one man told me, I can leave my house because my mother is there. She's a dog at home. You don't need to lock your house when your mother is there. She is, you don't put them there. You can safely leave your grandchild at home. We are not recognizing their contribution. I think we are looking them as some type of, somebody has come to our house, old man. Please, you have to change your attitude. I think the government has to change their attitude. That's what I want to tell you. This is very, very important for us. We should not put them every time. They are liabilities. They are bad. They are old. They cannot stand properly. They cannot sit properly. No, there are people. 12 out of the 15 years they are going to live. Only 3 years they need your help. They may need walking stick. Who is in the 65 is walking sticks now? No, they are all doing. Very important for us to look at the elderly in a positive way. Don't look at them in a negative way. We are always looking at negative in everybody. I think we are doing the same thing on the elderly. Look at positive. Look at their face. Look at their look. Look at their contribution. Unpaid contribution in our own families. Look at your own family if you have an old person, old mother. And you always think, my mother is not with me. Mother is with the village. So you feel the missing of them because they can contribute your knowledge. Grandmothers are, from Kerala I come from, grandmothers are transported to America to take care of the grandbaby. They are even migrating. Caregiver, free caregiver, only pay the ticket, air ticket, that's all. Air ticket free, they are there to look after your grandchildren. We have to put them, I think it's very important for us. And then I also want to talk about a little bit on, look at the education level. We are talking about today's elderly. I think we have to imagine the elderly. What type of elderly we are going to see 20 years from now? We have to talk about that. We are talking about skills for young people. What will be that 20 years back? What type of elderly India is going to have? Not the elderly of 1971. The elderly will be living longer. Elderly will have more assets. Elderly will have more education. Elderly will have many things more than his father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather. So that we have to put it in your policy. Don't look at my father like I look at my grandfather. They are different. So that you have to project them. What is called imagining the elderly. We are not imagining. You have to dream about elderly. You have to dream them, like dreaming India. You have to dream them. How imagining you can think of elderly. Then you will not talk about elderly as a burden. You will say elderly as a challenge for us. How I can keep engaging my grandmother. How I can keep engaging my grandfather. How I can keep engaging my old man. How that engaging with them. Now you are disengaging with them. Oh, old man. Engagement. We should start about that. This is very important. They are going to be rich. They are going to be old, they are going to be highly educated, they may be working, they are all working. This is very important. I think I have put some points for you. Now I will go for conclusion because I want to talk more on second innings. Second innings, I think somebody should write a book on second innings now. I have seen people who start their second career after 60 and they do wonders. One man told me, before retirement I have not done much work. Now I am doing so much work. You can do voluntary work, you can do so much work. So second innings, we should talk about that. Not first inning. Even people have second innings includes many, many things. Employment, education, healthcare, starting NGOs, the second innings are very, very, very important. Now, when we talk about elderly, I said about inclusiveness. We have to look at them like assets. Look at them. We have to mainstream elderly into our development. Finally, I told you in the earlier that we have to also talk about political participation of elderly senior citizens in this country. Because please remember, they are the policy maker. Look at the current age profile of the 542 MPs. We had an election last week. Look at their profile. We got it through a website. You see here, out of 542 MPs, you have 189 MPs above 60 years. That is 35% of the total MPs in the Lok Sabha are above 60. Their population percentage is only 8%. Out of 100, you have only 8 old people in the country, but out of 100 MPs, you have 35 MPs above 60. They will not do policy for them. They can change your note in 1 minute. The note is not valid. Who is the person? GST. They can decide policy for the country. They will not think about themselves. 33% of the people are above 65. Please remember, people who are 50 now in the MPs, they will slowly progress to 60s. Many of them will not die because they are well fed. They are with very, very good health care. Everything they will do. They will live. They will contest election 3rd time, 4th time. If you look at that, after 10 years from now, 68% of the India's Lok Sabha will be by 60 plus. 67%. Are you worried about them? You should worry about yourselves. They can do something, you lose your jobs. One fine signing, everything will go. You are worried about them. I think we are in the wrong direction. I think this is very, very important. You don't worry about them, we should worry about us. They can do some policy, you lose your job. Please remember, elderly, don't underestimate them. Don't underestimate the elderly, they are in a powerful position. 189 MPs are sitting there, above 60. In the country, only 8%. They are overrepresented in the policy making body. You can do that for assembly. You can do anything, including president, vice president, prime minister, everybody is a senior citizen. They will take care of themselves. We don't need to worry about them. Conclusion, 4 minutes. Yes, I told you earlier, they are living only 15 years after 60. Out of that, only 3 years they will be unproductive. They need lot of health care, bedridden, care economy, fall sick, second bypass surgery, third bypass surgery, ICU, all will come in the last 3 years. But 12 years they can be resourceful. Are you able to recognize that and understand that and give them proper recognition? I think we have to look at it. We have to change our mindset. Second in game. Why can't we start an employment exchange for old people in this country? Anyway, the young people have no jobs anyway. Let us at least have the old people have jobs. What is wrong? At least they have jobs, yeah? Second innings. And the third point, we are talking about retirement. I was in a village in a state here. I asked one of the old lady who is 80 plus, retirement? No retirement. For me, death is retirement. They are working until they die. You are talking about them, they are dependent. Oh my God, oh my God. They say, you go God. Retirement is for them death. And you are telling they are burden to the society. Very wrong, very wrong. Finally, the grandparents. Grandparents' contribution you can put in your national income statistics. They may be contributing more than informal sector workers in this country. If you put the money, if you want a 24 hours unpaid servant, how much you have to pay in the city, you can imagine. Unpaid work, they get only meals. They will wash your clothes, they will do everything for you. A old lady, she gets up at 4 o'clock, she sleeps at 10 o'clock. Old lady, not young lady I'm talking about old lady. They are more old people. And finally, recently I met an old man. He was 78. I asked him, where do you stay? Where do you stay? He told me, my son lives with me. My son lives with me. I said, what happened to him? He's still unemployed? He has no job? He has no house? No, sir, he has nothing. I am paying him, I am feeding him. But another man told me, where do you stay? I stay with my son. Please remember, this old man told me, my son lives with me. This is the economy they are contributing. They have a house to live. They can tell the son, please stay here until you get a house. Otherwise, until I die, you get my house. They are rich. Recognize them. They will be doing lot of things for the economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting explanation. Especially, he's stressing out the importance of the treating elderly as an asset, not liability. This is very important implication in terms of the how to restore, how to reform the old social systems we have, which made at the time of the early demographic transition. I think that's very, very important thing. Next, I will invite Professor K.S. James, who is currently director and a senior professor, International Institute for the Population Society.
Thank
You
you.
have around 20 minutes.
And thank you also for inviting me to this exciting session. But unfortunately, both Professor Rajan and me are demographers, so there is some sort of repetition is inevitable in this, except that the entertainment part of it, I will not be able to do it. So, because Rajan is also my teacher, so I know he has been a teacher of par excellence in the classroom, so he is that way always been very enthusiastic for us to listen to him. So let me just broadly tell you what is the focus of my presentation. So I will also touch upon the demography of aging, because since Rajan has already touched on it, so I may just give you one or two major points on this. But I will primarily speak on the social security, or the providing a decent living for the elderly. That is a major concern, because all the fiscal issues comes there, the economics of aging comes there. So what is actually our take on that? That is that actually one has to really think of it. And perhaps I will also touch upon the health vulnerability. These are the two major issues always once you talk about the elderly we speak about, because the social security is one aspect. How do you provide a decent living? And the second is the major health vulnerability, which we expect that the elderly will have in the due course. So, and then what is the way forward? So my talk will be on maybe touching some of these aspects. So let me just tell you about something about the demography aging. Because, this generation has always been talking about demographic dividend in India. But, I think there is a serious puzzle here because of demographic dividend, because we have been overemphasizing demographic dividend in India. Because if you really look at demographic dividend in India, the period in which a state in the country is in the demographic dividend, typically a high proportion of adult population, is really largely a very, very small period, window of opportunity. Actually, it is not really even 30 to 40 years in India. So overall in India, we say we have a longer period because we have extreme heterogeneity across states. Otherwise, as a state, as a country, as a state, the period in which a state has the demographic dividend is relatively very, very short. If you really look at the other Western countries, which are actually the previous session was telling, it is far, far higher than what we are actually living. So the demographic dividend which we are taking is really a puzzle, because we are not very sure whether actually we are going to enjoy that demographic dividend, primarily because of the second points. the problem is that, India's fertility transition also has been substantially different from what actually we experience from other parts of the world. Because in the other parts of the world, the fertility transition happened because after adequate socioeconomic development has taken place, after adequate living standard improvement has taken place, so naturally all the demographic, when the people came to the adult ages, a large proportion of the people came to adult ages, they already had a better education, they had a better standard of living than India. So we actually intentionally decided that, we should emphasize our family planning program among the poor so that we can have a control of the population growth. So right now, simply because of that, the conscious policies, we also have a situation where actually large proportion of adult population has a lower number of children, but at the same time, they all actually unskilled, they are actually poorly literate, and then actually they are also may not be able to contribute that much significantly, which you would have expected to contribute to the economy. So that way, actually, the real dividend, in case we have to experience a real demographic dividend, it should really come from the second demographic dividend many people are talking about, whether actually our elderly can be a demographic dividend for the country. If so, we would be able to achieve that we expect the economic growth or the economic dividend which we speak about for the country, not really because we have a large youth population that I'm not very sure, consciously not very sure whether which we will be able to achieve the demographic dividend. And secondly, it also depends on the investing in population, so considering the future demographic changes, so these are at most important. We will come back to that after discussing all these issues. So this is what the graph which I was telling. So if you look at some of these countries, because if you look at a mere 7%, the proportion of elderly, to 14%, almost doubling of the proportion, because we have almost 7.8% population of elderly now. The doubling of the population to that 14%, for the France, it took almost 120 years. For the Sweden, also it took almost 80 years. So it is actually something for the developed countries. It was actually something about 80 years to 120 years. We expect that, it was such a gradual decline in the population, the fertility transition, as well as a gradual increase in the aging population which we experienced those countries. But for India and China, it is only 20 years and 30 years. So for China, it may be 20 years, and India, it will be 30 years. So we see changes in the country, the demographic. We are really living in a century. Actually, we see a very rapid societal and demographic changes, which is unprecedented in the history of the world. So that is the type of changes we experience in the demographic phenomena, which is unprecedented. So we need to be really prepared. What is that we are going to really looking ahead for the country as a whole. So what does it mean? I already told, because it is really something around 20-25 years, a very small window of period which we are expecting, and our population is rapidly going to grow up. The elderly population is rapidly going to go up in the future. So if you look at this graph, you will get an idea about it. This is primarily for the South Asian countries. I'm really not looking at the G20 countries. Actually our period up to 2015, if you look at, the gradual process of aging period is almost over. Now actually what we're going to experience is a very rapid pace of increase in the aging. So I'm saying the demographic dividend in which we are speaking about in any of the South Asian countries, and there are some variations, because if you look at Pakistan, it may be slightly later compared to the India, or maybe Bangladesh is slightly earlier than India. So these kinds of differences are there between South Asian countries. Otherwise, actually the period of demographic dividend is almost, you can say, is almost we are getting out, because the reason is we are telling that up to 2030 or 35 India may have demographic dividend, typically because there are some states in India, because larger states like UP or Madhya Pradesh, which we will experience demographic dividend a little more time, because they are lagging behind in fertility transition. Otherwise, actually the period of demographic dividend is virtually over for the country, and actually we are in the stage where there is a rapid aging is going to happen, so we need to be prepared for that kind of a scenario. So this is sort of telling about the future. I can tell you what is really, because if you look at from 1950 to 2015, the elderly proportion has increased in India only from 5% to something around 8% or 8.4%. But look at next 50 years or 100 years, what is really not less than 100 years, some 75 to 85 years. You can see what is rapidly it is going to change, not only in India, but in all the South Asian states. So it is very unprecedented changes which was going to happen, because 2050 is not very far, another 20 to 30 years now, so which we are going to experience. So it means that actually the proportion of people of elderly in the coming decades will be much fasterly increasing. So that will have significant effect, because we can also see a significant difference between male proportion and female proportion. That is also going to happen, because not only that it is increasing, because out of the elderly, almost 60% of the female will be widowed as well in the country. So it is a very huge proportion of female living on widowhood, and also the proportion of elderly increasing. So this is sort of a larger demographic scenario which we are going to speak about, actually what is really going to happen, because our demographic dividend is virtually getting over. We are really going to see a very rapid increase in the population aging, and then actually what is that the way forward? That is what we are looking at. I will basically, as I told you, I will touch upon these two aspects. One is our social security aspect, which primarily speaks of the economic well-being, and then I will come back to some issues of the health aspects. So I think we all understand that economic independence is the vital for the elderly. That is what we expect. They should not be dependent on others, because dependency may not be available for them, because when the number of children comes down, migration is inevitable, because for any family, for the children who are educated, migration is inevitable for the better standard of living of the children. So they have to migrate, they will migrate, we cannot actually stop them. So anywhere demographic transition takes place, we also see a rapid increase in the migration, the rate. That is also going to happen in India. So, but at present, currently, we can say only quarter of the elderly in the country is economically independent. If you look at the surveys, that is what we can say 25% of the elderly are nearly economically independent, so they might not need much support. But we can say there are other quarter of the elderly is only partially independent, so they have to get support from the children. Now, mostly they are getting support from the children. And we can say 50% of the elderly in India actually sort of fully dependent on their family now. That is the current scenario in which we are living. So it is only 25 is fully independent, and another 25 partially dependent, and another 50% in the country are sort of fully dependent on the children. Or maybe there are some transfers taking place. So if you look at, this is also on South Asian countries. If you look at actually the countries, we also see very, very wide variations in the social security provision as well. Because, if you look at India, we provide something around $3 as a social security among the poor sections of the population. But there are countries like Maldives, which is much smaller countries, but they give almost $150. Nepal is giving almost $19. So we see there is a large variation, despite the fact that, the proportion of living without children or living alone is different in these countries, or proportion living with children. With all these variations, we see a wide real variation across South Asian countries, despite the fact that, all these countries are relatively poor. They are not really very rich countries. So we see there is no direct connection between actually our per capita income or our GDP or the social security provisions in the country. This is also true when you come to the state scenario. If you look at the states in this country, what is actually the social security provisions in this country? So you see a wide variation across states. You will see, like the Pondicherry is the one which is giving the maximum, almost 2,000, but that's a small union territories. But we also see there are other states like Haryana, which is giving over more than 1,500 social security benefits to the people of the elderly. And there are Kerala and other states which are doing much better, but there are other states, like many of the states like Punjab or other states, which is doing much worse in the social security provision. So what does it really indicate? The one important conclusion is that there is no connection between them. If we look just like a correlation between these two indicators, we don't see any correlation between your GDP per capita and your social security provision. So because we always think that there is a fiscal concern. If there is a fiscal concern, actually the poor states in the country should not have provided a higher social security benefit than the richer states. But we don't see that kind of a connection between your poverty levels in the states and the social security provision. So simply fiscal concerns cannot be the sole reason for really not providing a social security benefits to the rich. The second is that if you just take a correlation, we also don't see any correlation between old age security and the percentage of older population in the state. Because, the proportion of the percentage of older population is very high in Kerala, even Tamil Nadu, and there is no connection between these two. Because, there are other states which is actually much worse, much lower proportion of the population old age, but still they are giving much better social security benefit. We also don't see that kind of a connection in the states. So I'm saying, there is some differences are there in the provision of the old age security. Some states, they classify the people based on the age. Some say younger old, they give less, and older age, they give less, more, and those kinds of variations which we see. Otherwise, we don't see much kind of a connection neither with the GDP or with the state domestic product or with the proportion of the elderly. So it means that actually a mere fiscal concern doesn't seems to be appealing an explanation for really not providing an adequate amount of social security in these countries, in these states. Then how do they finance? Actually, that is what actually more important, because we also told almost 50% of the elderly doesn't have actually any, they're completely dependent on the others, so they don't have any means actually to sustain. Only 50%, which is the other 50% who has some means of sustenance. Because if you really look at the elderly, simply because we are living in an informal sector economy, we also see that the proportion of elderly continues to work beyond 60 is substantially high in India. So we don't have a strict retirement age except for 10% of the workforce in the country. So, and except for the 10% of the workforce, we get pensions. So naturally, 90% of the workforce is completely depending on the older ages, either because they're working or because there is transfers from their children or maybe some parts of the social security benefits. So this is sort of a summary you will get if you really look at what is really happening in India on this. One is that almost, you can say, something around 35% of the elderly has some income, either because they continues to work, or they have some asset income, or they have some wages which they get from their current work. And there are something about employees' pension is almost 10% of the elderly, which I have already told. And social pensions is something around 20% of them get it as some social pensions, including widow pension as well as other benefits. So something around, you can say 40% of the elderly or 43% of the elderly doesn't have anything, actually no income. So this is actually sort of a summary picture which we get in India. And so what is the way out? So one thing is that, I fully agree with Rajan, actually defining elderly itself is a problem. Whether actually we should define at 60 or we should define as much above the age, because there are some work which is going on, actually how really we have to define elderly. There is also a work which tells that, it should be defined based on what is you expected to live rather than actually up to what level you lived. So now we define based on a prospective measures, not on a prospective measures, it's actually a backward-looking measures. We look at once you attain an age 60, you will be defined as elderly. So instead of that, really you can also look at how many years you are going to live. That is why people say that if you are going to live 15 years more, so you are defined as an elderly. So which is maybe 65 or 67 in the case of the country. So then also, we also need to think of productive employment and skill levels for the elderly. It's not for the current elderly, but for the future elderly. It means that the current adults who are actually going to be the elderly, they have to be skilled, they have to take care of, because the proportion is going to be higher in the future, not at present. At present, 8% it can still sustain, but in the future it is going to be a serious problem. So what is actually the current adult population will be in the elderly in the future. So what we can really do for better employment opportunities for them, and also much more investment, etc. in the future. So let me also just talk one or two slides on the health fronts, because we all know there is increasing life expectancy, and there is also a slight increase in the burden of disease, but not significantly. But we also know that almost 50% of the elderly in India has a chronic disease. That is a significant number of elderly. And we also know that almost 8% of the elderly have some issues with activities of daily living. So it means that they need some support for their daily living, which almost constitute 10 million elderly in the country, so which is a significantly high proportion, considering the number of people in the country. And how does we address these kinds of burden? So if you, I think I will skip this elderly, and then we say, actually, how do you address these health challenges? You know, one is definitely, I think we have already heard about the health and wellness centers, which is actually a better concept actually the government of India has introduced, primarily because it has a canvas for the elderly health care rather than the primary health center, which was primarily a maternal and child health centers earlier. So we have much more wider canvas, which is actually visualized in the wellness centers. At the same time, actually, we also need to think of what is actually for the chronic diseases, because the insurance doesn't necessarily be a better approach actually to address the elderly health care, because we always found that whenever there are problems within the household, elderly can be left out and adult population might be given insurance benefits rather than within the households, because they are working, they have to be given priority. If there are two people got ill in the same household, one elderly and one adult population, if there are only 5 lakhs cap, maybe adult will get better health care rather than elderly. So there can be elderly will be missed out in that process in a health insurance system. We also have to think of how to really take care of the people who are actually activities of daily living. I told you 10 million population has to be taken care of to a palliative care or other care, which means that you need to really train almost, if not 10, at least 7 to 8 million people who can actually take of a care economy which we are thinking about. And who will train them and what kind of training should be given. We don't really have no idea about what is really happening, and this proportion is going to increase substantially. Now it is 10 million, so if we can look at another 10 years later, it can be something around 20 to 25 million elderly who needs some support for the activities of daily living. It means that if they don't have children with them, and who will actually take care of them, that is a serious issue which needs to address. So there is also a wider scope of employment opportunity for younger generation, simply because we have a large proportion of older population which is living. And we also has to learn several lessons actually from different interventions. I'm sure Matthew will speak some of these interventions they are also undertaking. Palliative care in Kerala, or there are Matthew's interventions in Bihar in terms of self-help group, etc. I think these are all important lessons actually one can really learn and incorporate. Otherwise, the healthcare needs will be a major challenge for the elderly in the country. So that's what's actually, I don't think that I need to conclude anything, because I have already told what is actually how to define elderly on demographically, and what is the way to enhance social security, old age security, because fiscal concern need not appears to be a valid reason for denying them, and the healthcare provision, and then how actually increase the investment in the care provision. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor James. Very, very informative and very insightful about how to, the design the system, given the changing status of the elderly. I think that's one. Also, I think it all depends on the country context. The India is more relying on the family transfer, but the other countries, the Western countries, are heavily relying on the public finances to support the elderly. That gives a lot of the challenges how to support those population in the issue of the difficulty of the public finance and so on. So then it needs to be country tailored situation. Then let me invite Matthew Cherian, who is Chief Executive Officer of Help Age in India, based in New Delhi. You have around 20